This is John Michael Garapi, and today we're deep diving into Marvel Comics What If number 6. What if the Fantastic Four had different superpowers? Before we flip open the comic, though, we need to talk about What If. By 1977, Marvel's modern era of superheroes had been punching do-better face for 14 years. And while 14 years may not seem like an impressive amount of time now, in an age where major story beats come and go and not much of lasting consequence seems to happen, in the early days of Marvel, whole paradigm shifts sprung from a scattershot of one-and-done stories. To get a taste of this, go read Fantastic Four number 48 through 50. In a span of 3 books, we're introduced to Galactus, the Silver Surfer, and Woot the Watcher. 3 characters who become instrumental in the myth of Marvel. And this story, one in which a world-devouring god named Galactus descends upon a planet and must be outwitted by its inhabitants, will be repeated time and again throughout Marvel's history. But in number 48, it's novel and unique. I mean, sure, there's strains of Cthulhu and The Day the Earth Stood Still in there, but still, unique for Marvel. Nowadays, a similar plot would become the major event of the year, requiring a core miniseries book, a side miniseries book of assorted background stories, crossovers into 3/4 of the active titles, and a full database of hate mail from the segment of the fanbase that fears change. In 1965, it was just another story. A story that happened to leave an impact. So what happens when a generation of teenagers who read comics during an era filled with genre-shaping stories become comic-reading adults? They look back at what they once swallowed whole and ask what might have been. Hey, did you ever come across that reprint of Amazing Spider-Man number 1 where Spider-Man tries to join the Fantastic Four? What if he did? He'd be a boon to the Four, but with Parker on interplanetary romps, there wouldn't be anyone to keep the Green Goblin in check. Norman Osborn would end up ruling New York City. And he's so unhinged, he would inevitably see the Avengers as a major threat to his empire and make preemptive strikes against them. Which probably means the Avengers need to become an underground resistance to fight City Hall, and so on and so on. One change cascades into 1,000 stories. Early What If books don't have the luxury to tell 1,000 stories. With only 34 pages and no precedent to build on, the writers and illustrators could only breach 1 or 2 stories with an alternate universe before wrapping stories up with a bow so they could start all over again the next issue. What if the Hulk kept the intelligence and personality of Bruce Banner? What if the Avengers split up early when Hulk left the group in Avengers number 2? What if the original Marvel superheroes never disbanded after World War II ended? And then there is... What if the Fantastic Four had different powers? Which, yeah, sure. I guess that's a question. And I suppose in the hands of a good writer, this could be a quirky story which shows how an arbitrary choice could radically alter the fate of an entire universe. Or, barring that, 4 vignettes written by 4 different authors about 4 different powers for the Four might make an interesting change of pace for the 6th installment of What If. Yeah, this is none of that. This smacks of a boardroom meeting where someone mentions the readers like seeing new characters with new powers, but they don't want to learn a bunch of new names. And someone got the brilliant idea that overworked writer-editor Roy Thomas could crank that out in the next What If. And he sure did crank something out. Let's dive our hands into this sludge in all its messy glory. Usually, What If stories feature a predictable pattern. Uatu, an alien sporting a jumbo melon, likes to watch, no kink shame, and acts as our guide. He introduces the characters, explains what they did in our reality, makes some mystical comments about the concept of the multiverse, then shows us another universe where some key event is altered, sending us tumbling down a bunny hole. Some of the best What If stories mimic good detective stories, in that there's a key detail in the setup, which pays off later in surprising ways, which may seem obvious in hindsight, yet here we are. We won't be treated with any of that here. Instead, the team wastes 4 pages fighting a gaggle of hooded goons with guns. They don't seem to belong to any criminal organization or be anyone's henchmen. The Thing even says,
"Nuts! Why are we wasting a nice afternoon playing cops and robbers with these jokers, when we could be stopping some real pro, like Doc Doom or the Mole Man from taking over the whole blamed world?"
Which is a damn good question, Thing. This isn't what the FF does, so why this setup? That's like if I wanted to show how great a basketball player Michael Jordan was before he teamed with Bugs Bunny to play against the Monstars, by opening the movie Space Jam with Michael Jordan turning down $1 million endorsement deal. It's the opposite of what Jordan does, and has nothing to do with team-building basketball or outwitting galactic aliens who stole the talent of the 5 ballers Warner Brother could afford. Meanwhile, Invisible Girl is acting like she jumped into a fighting game and doesn't know all the buttons yet. Instead of throwing up force fields to deflect bullets, Sue Storm turns the hoodlum's legs invisible, which causes one man to fall over himself because he can't see his legs, while two other hoods get tangled into each other's legs because they can't see where one leg begins and the other ends. That's not how legs work. Nobody stares at their feet to make sure they're touching the ground when they run. I can't see my feet when I'm running, which, yeah, okay, I could stand to lose a few pounds. Shut up. But while it may shock me to witness my friend's legs disappear, I'm pretty sure I wouldn't choose that exact moment to slide tackle him. While the gunmen are falling all over themselves, one of them almost shoots Sue, which makes Ben so mad he's ready to use a thing-sized punch on a human-sized human, scattering pieces of him across the bay and throughout Jersey City. Thankfully, Reed yanks the hood away at the last second. This is how Ben is first introduced to us. An emotional loose cannon that could explode at any time, who could tear a man in two by snapping his fingers. After the fight, Johnny says, "Sometimes I still wonder about our powers, and what might have gone down if, somehow, we'd all have gotten different powers altogether." Thanks, Johnny, for leading this horse of a plot to water. You know, we didn't need 4 pages to get to this point. We could do this all in 2 panels. One with Johnny and Ben in bathrobes eating cereal at a breakfast table, and the second panel where he says, "Hey, you ever wonder what would have happened if we had different powers?" Either way, as soon as someone says, "What if?" Uatu launches into panel like the creeper he is, and whoa! Okay, yeah. The Watcher was once drawn as an overweight cosplayer of the Greek god Apollo, if Apollo wore gardening gloves and sported a gourd for a head. It took time for artists to settle upon his modern proportions, which is somehow more alien and less creepy. Exaggerating Uatu's noggin makes sense, since his vow of non-interference means all he ever does is watch or talk. Well, and he listens. I bet he's a good listener. Old images of Uatu portray him as a beefy boy, and who am I to make fun? He is in far better shape than me. I don't know how he maintains his rippling physique on the moon, what with the 10% Earth gravity thing. It takes a lot of squats to turn that fat to thick. Now I'm imagining Uatu doing endless squats while peeping on the Marvel Universe. The less said about this, the better. From here, Uatu shows how the Fantastic Four got their powers. For such a famous scene told over and over again, it's shockingly boring. The four fly through space, they're bombarded with cosmic rays, they crash land, then they find out that they have powers. The only highlight to this story are the cosmic rays, setting aside how silly it is to imagine that exposure to space beams can make you super stretchy. I've always been a fan of the shape and color of Marvel's cosmic rays. We don't get to hear them, but here's an idea of what they may sound like. Pew pew pew! Wee woo! Wah 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 woo! Wee woo! Wah 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 woo! Zoom! Z z z z z z z. The 4 pages it takes to retell how the FF got their powers will be repeated again, beat for beat, but with different powers. Damn it, Uatu! Show us something the Four once did which will dramatically be different when they wind up with different powers. Are you making stuff up as you go along? Because it feels like someone called Uatu into the studio because another talk show host failed, and he's just dragging everything out until we can get to the clip. Anyhow, in alternate universe, alternate four alternate through cosmic rays and crash their ship. Ben complains about back pain. Maybe he should be more worried about that hand. In our world, this would be the beginnings of a multi-million-dollar lawsuit. But at this moment, Ben is more concerned about how he doesn't want to complain about his back pain because people will think he's some sort of sissy. And then he sprouts a pair of fabulous wings. That's it. Just wings. Later, Ben will mention he's more agile now, but I'm not sure how a pair of wings sticking out of your back can turn you into a graceful ballerina. Don't get me wrong, I would be ecstatic if I suddenly grew wings and could fly. Well, to be more precise, I'd be confused. And I'd be harried because that's not something you can hide. That said, it would be, in a word, fantastic. But half the superpower main courses come with a side dish of flying. It's an obvious downgrade from the Human Torch's original ability, which not only includes being on fire power, but also rocket jet power, which is considerably faster than wing power. Ben isn't a hideous monster now, so that's a plus. But this Ben doesn't know he's a monster in another universe, and the rest of the story doesn't center on what if Ben wasn't so damn ugly. No mention of Alicia Masters, the Yancey Street Gang, or maybe Aunt Petunia deciding to visit him once in a while. Lost opportunities all around. Meanwhile, Johnny becomes a human robot. No, not a cyborg. Not an android or a guy in a robot shell. He is a living robot. I don't know what that means. And I don't know how cosmic radiation can magically turn your body into gears and transistors. But this is the least bizarre choice in this issue, so I'm going to roll with it. Sue Storm's new power is she can stretch. She has Mr. Fantastic's powers. Everyone else gets a new power except for Sue, which, yeah, Sue, congratulations. That is a different power than what you previously had. You got there. You know, Sue, you didn't need to choose someone else's power. You could have chosen any... Oh. No? You're good? Okay. She's good, everybody. Everybody, Sue's fine. Let's keep going. At this point, there's an explosion. And the crew finally realize they left Reed inside a ruined ship that's on fire. But that's okay, because Reed turned into a sentient brain. Maybe his entire body became sentient, but the explosion destroyed everything except the brain. Perhaps a big toe is hiding in New York City, confused and alone, but afraid to expose itself to even its friends for fear that it would burden them. The toe, taking on the new pseudonym of R. Hallex, would start a new career, writing anonymous scientific articles for the Daily Bugle. But the absurd ignorance of an overbearing J.J. Jameson and envy towards his former friends who got to participate in fantastic adventures wears on Hallex. He deserves better. He deserves more. Hallex uses his superior intellect to manipulate events to his benefit. He rises through the shadowy ranks of an underground criminal organization until one day he amasses so much power that no one will challenge him, no matter what form he takes. On that day, R. Hallex reveals himself to the world as Big Toe, the kingpin of crime. We know so little about Earth 7712 that this may as well be canon, so I'm declaring it canon right now. I'm pretty sure that's how it works. Anyhow, the Reed Richards that's now just the brain also gains the power to transmit thoughts and control minds, and he's surprisingly chill for a brain hanging out in the open environment. Here's something the story will never answer. Will Susan Storm still marry Reed Richards someday? Does a brain wear a tux at its own wedding? It wears a top hat, of course. Everybody knows that. So there you have it. The new Fantastic Four consisting of Dragonfly, Mandroid, Ultra Woman, and Big Brain. Is it worth mentioning that's not how you draw a brain? Are we sure Reed didn't become a sentient lump of lo mein? In their first mission, New 4 fights further felons. But this time it's Dr. Doom's henchmen out to steal Blackbeard's treasure in a museum, so we're on track with the first appearance of Dr. Doom in Fantastic Four number 5. Doom doesn't recognize these new thorns in his side, even though he went to college with Ben Grimm. To be fair, I wouldn't recognize most people I went to college with either, and I'm no megalomaniacal dictator wizard. But with the help of a sorceress viewfinder, it's revealed to Dr. Doom that Big Brain is none other than his be-hated Richards, which prompts Doom to fetch his special Reed Richards doll and flick its head off. What kind of hate boner must you have for a person to commission a doll of them just so you can ruminate over it? Richards! Meanwhile, back at the Baxter building, there is something incredibly delightful about a living brain rocketing around a building through so many hamster tubes. Suddenly, I'm envious of a man who is a lump of gray matter. Remember, folks, you too can zoom around your neighborhood in pneumatic tubes if you own billions of dollars and are willing to forego arms and legs. There's a brief montage where we see the Four and their new powers in everyday life. Instead of feared and shunned as the Thing, Dragonfly gets molested when he walks down the street since passerbys can't help but rub their mitts up and down his wings. Mandroid is annoyed with teen gawkers in an electronics store, so he uses his amazing telepathic machine power to turn the volume of the music up and blow out everybody's eardrums. Whoa! And Ultra Woman admires a bunch of kids playing in a playground and Stranger danger! Stranger danger! Sue, you don't touch other people's kids! What do you think this looks like to their parents? Meanwhile, Doom bypasses Baxter Building security and sidles right up to Big Brain. Victor offers Reed a body, which Reed passes on. I mean, did you see the pneumatic tube system and viewfinders he built for himself? Big Brain is living the life of Pee Wee Herman and He-Man in my Castle Grayskull playset combined. But Doom reminds Reed of what he may never do with Sue and shames him into watching his friends walk down the street arm in arm like they're off to see the Wizard of Welding jumpsuits. Reed reluctantly agrees. and Doom walks off with his prize brain in a jar when Johnny wanders into the hangar and, surprise, surprise, the man calling himself Dr. Doom turns out to be a bad guy. Johnny tells the others, and they race to Doom's castle, where a gloating Doom explains how he'll use big brain power to power his time machine so he can go to pirate time and steal Blackbeard's treasure. Standard supervillain stuff. Ben, Sue, and Johnny enter Doom's obviously booby-trapped castle and immediately split the party, because of course they do. I once played in a game of Dungeons & Dragons like this. We were making our way through the dungeon when we came across a room with 5 doors radiating out from it. We argued amongst ourselves over which door to go through first when a brilliant plan was proposed. There were 5 doors and 5 players. What if we all kicked open a door at the same time? That was the last adventure we played with those characters. Never split the party. Ultra Woman finds herself trapped in a room with quick-drying concrete. But concrete has air pockets, so Sue slips through those pockets like a piece of spaghetti through concrete. Look, it's a good enough idea in the abstract, but the only way the rest of this comic book makes sense is if the next 8 pages are told occurrence at Owl Creek Bridge style. Dragonfly's trapped room is a spinning metal cage, which he flies right through. I guess Von Doom is running a book adventure because none of these traps appear to be designed with a levitating warlock in mind. Mandroid is trapped between 2 giant rollers, and the floor is also magnetized, sticking his feet into place. That's either a very specific feature to this room, or Victor is hemorrhaging money to magnetize all the floors of his castle. Joke's on Doom, since Mandroid absorbs into his automaton body the very energy that powers the crushing rollers. Take notes, people. It's been 14 years, and the Marvel staff still does not know how magnets work. The players rejoin and meet Doom. They fight for a bit. Doom straight up pimp slaps Sue with his bare hand, then swilliclugs her with an armored backhand. That gets Big Brain all sorts of riled up, giving him enough power to smash through Doom's defenses and gain control of Victor's body long enough to force him to hit the self-destruct button on his own castle. This does 2 things. It reduces the castle to a fine powder, and does absolutely no harm to the people at the apex of the blast. It turns out that Big Brain's mind control blast was so powerful that he accidentally mind-wiped Doom and took over his body. With no sign of remorse, Reed redubs himself Mr. Fantastic and claims the group is now the new Fantastic Four because he now has legs. What an ego. Uatu ruminates over the problems of Reed gaining Victor's ruined face for a couple of panels, as if being a brain in a jar might be better than being butt ugly. Then the big guy pieces out. So what did the different powers mean for the Fantastic Four? Almost nothing, really. The Four fought the same early villains and won those fights in much the same way. It's all done off camera. Doom ran the same Blackbeard's treasure racket with minor changes the first time the Four met him. The only difference now is that at the end of the fight, Victor Von Doom is effectively brain dead, and a man with equivalent hubris is marching around in his body. Probably. I don't know. Maybe Doom comes back, but we never get to see that here. And yes, I know this universe is returned to in 2 other comics 10 and 20 years in the future, but I haven't read them yet, so don't at me, bro. The ramifications of Doom being brain dead are never explained to us, which is annoying because this is the first actual divergence of the Fantastic Four's story in this entire book, and now the book is over. That's the what if Marvel should have printed. What if Victor Von Doom died when he first encountered the Fantastic Four? What would happen to the Kingdom of Latveria? What alternate threat would gain power in his stead? If Doom was not there to steal the power of the Beyonder for himself in the original Secret Wars, would the supervillains end up being the ones who won that ultimate contest and reshape the Marvel Universe in their image? Removing Dr. Doom from the playing field of Marvel Comics raises all kinds of interesting questions, and we see none of that resolve. Instead, we saw what happens if editors take a pair of scissors to a classic FF book, cut the FF out, and paste it in thrift store knockoff X-Men, but otherwise left the plot alone. It's infuriating, but not as infuriating as knowing that I love stories like this. Yes, even potentially miserable stories like What If Number 6, because I love speculation. I love playing at the doors of destiny and peeking at what lies beyond. Even when the speculation is inexpert, I love it, because it outlines the challenging to spot boundaries between surprising speculation and poor writing. Even the worst of stories can make me that much more grateful for how powerful a well-written story can be. Hey, I don't have a proper outro yet for this series because this is the first time I made a video in this format. So instead, I want to thank you. Thank you for sharing this terrible, terrible comic with me. If you want to see more videos like this, hit the like button and/or subscribe. Take care.